Morning, everybody. We are here with Brian Nowicki, and he's had an incredible journey on carnivore, and we're going to talk about it. Let's go.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. So hey, how are you doing? First of all, doing good?
Yeah, I'm doing good. On my way to fabulous.
Great. All right. So let me tell you a little bit about my story. It really to tell the story best, it has to start before I found carnivore diet. So when I was a teenager in high school and that, I was really skinny. And after I graduated from high school, I wasn't as active anymore and started to, slowly gain weight. I got married. My wife got pregnant with twins. And from there, um, I just continued to gain weight. So what it ended up being was that most of my adult life, I was overweight. And around 2017, I found a diet. At this point, I have been trying multiple different types of diets and so forth, and never really did good with losing weight. Maybe I lose a few pounds here or there, and then I'd gain it right back. And so in 2017, I found a diet that it was kind of low carb, but it was also low fat, and I was able to lose weight with it. But because it was low carb and low fat, I was really kind of starving myself, and I wasn't necessarily getting all the nutrients I should. Um, I was eating a lot of baby spinach as well, and at the time I didn't know, but that was causing me a lot of oxalate problems, a lot of pain in my joints, stuff like that. And so I lost quite a bit of weight. I actually lost around 100 pounds in about 9 months. But again, because it was low carb and it was low fat, it wasn't very sustainable for me. And I got to the point that I had just had enough and I couldn't continue to eat that way. So, what do you do with something isn't working for you? You kind of by default go back to what you were doing before. And I started to gain the weight back. In fact, I gained more than what I had before. And this puts me into 2018, like mid 2018 timeframe. And um, I had an incident that happened where my heart was not beating regularly. And I ended up going into the ER, and it turned out I was diagnosed with AFib. And that's something where your heart will, the signals to your heart for doing your heart rhythm, your beats, gets messed up and it starts to beat really, really fast. And then it kind of slows down a little bit and then it goes really, really fast and so forth. So that started in 2018. And my cardiologist told me that it would continue to get worse over time. And he was right. It did. Never told me anything about changing up my diet other than, you could lose a little bit of weight, but it's not going to really make a difference. AFib is just going to be there, right? Um, so this takes me now into 2022, and it's now the spring of 2022, and I'm feeling pretty depressed. I'm about as big as I've ever been at that point. Um, I have lots of pain. My back really hurts at this point. I can't sleep in bed more than a few hours, toss churn, and then I just can't sleep any longer in bed. And I go downstairs to the recliner and I sleep on the recliner the rest of the night. I snore a lot. I don't really feel like doing anything. I have no energy. I just lay around a lot, don't do much of anything. I have issues with my joints still at this point. My ankles will swell up. My knees sometimes swell up. My elbows, my wrists, that kind of stuff. Um, my big toes, both of my big toes, I had arthritis, and I would get these flare ups between my big toe and my ankles, where for a week or two at a time, my foot would just get really swollen on top of the foot, and I could barely walk or anything like that. And I just knew I needed to do something. Like I felt like if I continued to go this path, I wasn't going to probably live very much longer and so forth. And so I knew some people that were doing keto and they were having success with losing weight and so forth with keto. So this was in the spring of 2022. I started keto. I did lose a few pounds in like 3 months with keto, not anything big, but like 10 to 15 pounds or so. Still had a lot of the issues with the pain, still had the AFib. But in this time period, I began watching Dr. Barry and started to think more and more about carnivore. And then I started watching like Dr. Sean Baker and a few others. Dave Mack out there. Also started watching him and so forth. And I said, I really think carnivore is probably the way for me to go. And keep in mind at this point, the AFib episodes. So I didn't have persistent AFib. So I wasn't constantly in AFib. I would go into it and then maybe a few hours or so and I'd go out of it. But I would have like 2 to 3 episodes a week of that happening. And I started carnivore on July 1st of 2022. So I'm almost at 3 years now. But fairly quickly, I noticed that the snoring went away. My wife's like, "Yeah, you're not snoring anymore." Probably within the first few weeks, I was now sleeping in bed all night. So the back pain was much better. Within the first few weeks, the joint pain was pretty much gone. By a month in, I knew for sure that the joint pain was gone because I wasn't having any flare-ups, which would happen somewhere, between my elbows or knees or whatever, ankles. It would happen pretty quickly. And the other thing I noticed was really quickly that I was not having the AFib episodes anymore. In fact, now I'm basically a month short of 3 years, and I'm pretty much a month short of 3 years without a single episode of AFib. And I was having 2 to 3 episodes a week. And the interesting thing with that is I went back to my cardiologist. At the time, I was going to him every 6 months for check-ins and so forth. And so I didn't tell him I was doing carnivore, but I told him I was doing low carb. And, I guess I should say also, I lost about 60 pounds in the first 3 months and 85 pounds or so in the first year on carnivore diet. So then I went back to the cardiologist and he's like, I don't necessarily know why low carb would have anything to do with AFib or anything like that. It doesn't make sense. Like there's not really any way to fix it other than going into your heart and like burning out the spots in your heart where the signals are getting crossed up. And they had talked about that before starting carnivore a little bit, and I didn't really want to go that route, and I'm glad I never did. But anyway, he's like, so I don't know why that would help or anything, but it seems to be working. So just keep doing what you're doing. So that was, pretty cool that he felt that way. My primary care physician doesn't feel quite the same way about low carb, but that's okay, So this takes me now to, I guess, the fall of 2023 now. So that's a little over a year, about a year and a half into the carnivore diet. And my cardiologist decided that at that point, I was no longer high risk for stroke or, just going into AFib, because that's one of the big things with AFib is they worry about stroke because of your heart rate and your blood pressure getting up so high. So he took me off the blood thinner and medication for the AFib at that point. So it's been, I don't know, over a year and a half that I haven't been on that medication. And last fall, I went back again to do a stress test and check everything out. And everything went really well. So this fall, I'm going back again, and he's going to do some more tests just to make sure that they're not seeing any changes with my heart in terms of, so when you've been going into AFib a lot, it kind of changes your heart. It kind of enlarges it a little bit so they can kind of tell if you've been going into AFib or not. And because there's always a possibility that I go into it and don't even realize it and it go out of it right away, right? They don't think that's happening because he did have me on a heart monitor for 30 days and there were no recordings in 30 days. But that's, one thing he wants to just double check before he's completely like, yeah, there's no AFib happening. So we're going to do that again this fall. But it's really been great. It's been life changing because, I was at a point where I could almost make myself go into AFib just by stressing my heart too much, right? So doing, let's say, lifting weights, really heavy weight, there were times I could get myself to go into AFib from doing that. And then also with being on a blood thinner, it kind of made it tough to do different things. Like we went to the Smoky Mountains one time, and there was a hike that my family wanted to do, and it was fairly rocky and so forth and a little steep. And I didn't want to take the chance because if I fell and started bleeding, that could be a bad thing with being on a blood thinner. And, they'd have to try and get to me somehow, probably with a helicopter and all that stuff. So I felt like my life was kind of being taken away from that, you know? And of course, doing a hike wasn't very easy for me anyway. Like back then, I was well over 300 pounds, like I guess around 375 pounds. And I would, we would do even like some of the easier hikes, and I would constantly need to rest because I was just so out of shape, so overweight. And the last time we went to the Smoky Mountains was just last summer, and we did some pretty strenuous hikes, and I was really good, didn't really need to rest or anything. Like other people in the family had to rest, where I just had to stop for them, but I didn't really need to rest. So that was great. And so, kind of a summary here, I'm now 51 years old, and I would say I feel like I did back in my late 20s, early 30s. The arthritis that was in my big toes is gone. I don't have any issues there. In fact, I've banged one of my big toes in the last year or so and was like, great, that's going to start up a flare up, and nothing ever happened. But I don't have any pain there anymore. I used to get what I would call bursitis, where my ankle or my knee or elbow or whatever would flare up for a week or two at a time. And since I've been on the carnivore diet, that has not happened. And I mean, some part of my body would flare up like that multiple times a year before. And now it's been almost 3 years and none of that has happened. The back is completely good. I sleep well at night. Like I said, I lost the snoring, so I don't snore anymore. Just so many different things that have been improved. And then I didn't talk about this, but the just the ability to go out and do things. Like I said a little bit that I didn't really like to do anything. I just never felt the energy to do anything and just wanted to lay around and stuff. Probably about a year into carnivore, I think, is when I really started to notice a big difference there. And sometimes I get done working or whatever, and I'd say to my wife, well, you want to go do something? And she would just look at me like, what do you mean? Like, you never want to do anything. So those are the kinds of things that a lot of times you don't really think about, but, eating this way just totally changes your life, and you have that energy now and you feel like doing things. So those are like really good positives that I've seen. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
It's funny. I remember a similar comment from my wife. I've been doing carnivore about 6 weeks at that point. She'd seen me get out of the wheelchair and starting to lose all this weight again. And she came up to me one day and she said, it's absolutely amazing to have my husband back. And I think this is a similar story for so many of us. Like my progression was pretty similar. Like I had all, I've got osteoarthritis, and that I was always fighting with that. So I had the same thing in my shoulders, flares every once in a while, cortisone shots from time to time, that kind of a thing, and all just went away. And this is the common story with people that go carnivore, that everything just starts to heal. And it's kind of funny because when people first start carnivore and this stuff starts happening, they all become carnivore evangelists, just like I did. And, I mean, I couldn't shut up about it for the longest time. And it's natural when your life has become so horrible that you don't feel like living it anymore. And then this just changes it. And but how did it make you feel as you started doing the research and discovering kind of the issues with the Western medical approach to health and healing?
Yeah. Um, so the for me, I first started with just watching Dr. Barry, right? And I was like listening to what he was saying, and I'm like, but that's not right. Like that can't be right, right? Because that's what we've been told is what you're saying is wrong and so forth.
Yeah.
And I'd start thinking like, well, it kind of makes sense though if you start thinking about it logically. Like, yeah, it makes sense. That I'd be really like, you start looking at some of the research and you see like where there was a drop off in meat consumption, there was a drop off in uh, saturated fats, right? And that's really lines up with when people started getting sicker and sicker. Um, Same thing with the inclusion of more, what do I want to say, vegetable oils, different seed oils and stuff like that. Um, and even really to an extent, the inclusion of statins, which lower your cholesterol. All of that kind of coincides with the big spike up in people not feeling well, getting sick, cancers, different things like that. And, it's one of those things where I look at it and I say, at the time I was in my late 40s, I'm like, okay, at least I'm learning this now and I'm doing something now. But man, I wish that I knew this when I was younger, right? When I was a kid.
Yeah.
And then you start to kind of get not necessarily frustrated, but upset and mad that this isn't really taught to people, and it's kind of hidden, covered up, and you get like really upset because it's messing with people's lives. Like it's really all for profit, right? You get these companies that basically, I like to call it the sugar industry and the pharmaceutical industry, and uh, they, right from the start, they paid off studies to downplay the role of sugar and to say that saturated fat was the big problem. Um, and even at best, if you look at things logically, it's more of an association rather than a causation. And it just it is very upsetting that, for their profits, so that they could make money and continue to make money, they don't do what is right to make people healthy. It's all about a band-aid at this point. Here, you can take this drug, you can take this statin, whatever, which causes 10,000 other different side effects. You watch on TV in the US at least. I know you're in Canada, and I'm not sure if they have the same laws or not, but in the US, they allow them to advertise like Ozempic and other type of pharmaceutical, drugs on TV. And you see these commercials, commercial lasts like 45 seconds to a minute, somewhere in there. There's about 10 seconds of talking about the good things for it. And then it's like 35 seconds of talking about all the side effects. And it's like,
Yeah.
and you know, they got this happy music going and people are dancing and stuff.
Yeah.
And people just think, oh, well, that's a quick answer. You know, that's the quick fix for me. And it's not a fix. It's just a Band-Aid with a lot of other things that could happen. But people are looking for the quick, easy answer. They don't want to do what's really hard work. And, you know, with where our society is with the acceptedness of eating certain foods and drinking certain drinks and so forth, it really is hard work for people to do something like the carnivore diet because it's so accepted to eat these bad foods. And for them, they say, well, the easy fix is to just take that drug. But they're not fixing the issue. They're going to have to take the drugs for the rest of their life. It may cause other issues that they have to take another drug for. And at the same time, the pharmaceutical company's like, hey, we're making more money. So it's an upsetting thing. And it's very upsetting that you can't tell most people out there, even like friends and loved ones, what's happening. They get so defensive and upset with you that you would even say that, you know. So I don't know how you get it, but that's how it is for me. Like nobody else in my family really is doing carnivore. I have an uncle now that is doing carnivore. He just started a few weeks ago and he's dropped, I don't know, like 10, 15 pounds or so far. And he's like the pain starting to subside and stuff. So that's good. But even like my wife, she doesn't do carnivore. She's like, there's no way I could do it. I love food too much. And it's like, you say you love it, but I mean, is that more important than your health? That really becomes a question.
Yeah, and I have the same conversations with my wife. I mean, she's tried a couple of times, but for her, it's not so much, you know, missing the food. She's just literally physically addicted to sugar, and she just can't seem to get past it. And you know, it's got to be frustrating for both family members and you know, patients when they're dealing with their doctors. Like I remember when they had me on all these treatments, I was on 19 prescriptions, and about half of those were to treat side effects of the other half. And
Yeah.
you know, and they were trying to convince me that I had no options, that I was going to be bedridden and on these medications for the rest of my life. And it was, I mean, that was no life, couldn't live that way. So this is the trap that so many people get caught in with Western medicine. They single out symptoms and they treat those without looking at all at the underlying cause.
Mm.
That
Yeah.
I think that was one of the most frustrating parts for me when I started talking to my doctors about, you know, how I was doing this, you know, and they're shocked because they're seeing all these changes. As soon as I mentioned carnivore, you know, they don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
You know, I only had one doctor that was the exception, and that was my neurologist. I was lucky with her, but the previous specialist I had and my other doctors, you know, they're so against it, and yet they can't deny the results. So they're, you know, they don't know what to say anymore when I go in to see them. But
Mm.
you know, this it's a really amazing story that you've got, and you know, telling these stories is what inspires other people to give it a shot. Now, if you were talking to an absolute newbie that you were encouraging to try this way of life, what would you say to them?
Well, first of all, I would actually go against what most people say. Most people say just dive right in. And I would say not to do that. I would say to transition over like 4 to 6 weeks, probably a good amount of time. What you want to do, first of all, is get rid of all the really highly processed food and the sugar. Get the bag of sugar out of your pantry, first of all, right? That's like one of the big things. But get rid of all those really highly processed stuff. And then over 4 to 6 weeks, increase your intake of animal products and slowly decrease certain more whole food type of carbs, right? Excuse me. I got a little bit of cold here that I'm fighting. Um, but anyway, slowly decrease those types of carbs. Um, they could be like vegetables, whatever. Uh, but the reason why you do that slowly is really it has to do more with your gut and with some of the symptoms that a lot of people see when they first go cold turkey to carnivore. They'll run into issues with what they call the keto flu or something like that, for instance, where they get issues having to go to the bathroom all the time. Excuse me, diarrhea, right? So they get that. They get often they'll get tired, headaches, that kind of stuff, um, leg cramping. A lot of those things are more of like electrolyte issues, right? Being deficient in electrolytes. And then the fix there is to take more electrolytes in, take electrolyte drinks and so forth. You might not get rid of that completely with taking a transition, but you can take care of a lot of that. If you ease in, you don't have nearly as bad of an issue with that. And it also just helps your body, your gut to slowly transition into that. You have the different I can't think of the exact word I want to say, but the different types of in your body, in your gut, that feed on more carby, sugary foods or feed on more healthier foods, and slowly taking that over 4 to 6 weeks tends to help the gut better than if you just go cold turkey. Those bad mitochondria, I guess, or what the right term is, I want to say, they get like cut off and like starved basically, and they tend to, what's the word I want to say? They strike back on your body. It gets your body right, so that causes a lot of different problems. So that's why I say ease into it over 4 to 6 weeks. The other piece of it is if you just watch like different social media people out there, social media influencers, a lot of them are talking about they're eating OMAD and so forth. And you don't want to start going from eating 3, 4, 5 meals a day and just go down to one meal. That's just not going to work well. You're going to have the cravings and so forth. So start with where you're at. If you eat 4 meals a day, start at 4 meals and then try and cut it down to 3 and then down to 2 if you can. And eventually you'll get there. Like I started out fairly quickly, went down to 2, and I did 2 for quite a while. Then I kind of went to 1. It worked okay for me. I went back to 2, and then I went back to 1, and I'm pretty much 1 meal a day now. So if anybody watches my videos now, yeah, I'm almost 3 years in. I'm eating 1 meal a day. But if I tried to do that right from the start, I would have had all kinds of problems. And then the other piece with that, when you have problems, and you've got the different gut issues going on the first 2-4 weeks or so, you start to get frustrated. Maybe you don't see the weight loss as well, and then you give up. So if you ease into it, you're setting yourself up for much better chance of success. And I think that if you really stick to it for a good 60 days, you're going to find that you feel so much better. So much pain that you might have had, even if you didn't think that you really had pain, you just notice that you feel better. You're like, wow, you know what? My shoulder used to hurt a little bit. It doesn't hurt anymore. So you get all that stuff back. You start getting energy, and really just in 60 days, I really think that you will feel like you don't want to go back. And even if you haven't lost weight, like some people don't lose weight right away, but they just feel so much better. They're like, yeah, it's the way to go.
Yeah, it's definitely not an easy plan or lifestyle to be on. It's simple, but it's definitely not easy. I mean, I made the mistake, like you were just talking about. I jumped right in, and man, I went through some nasty keto flu. I mean, I was withdrawing from sugar and the carbs, and as the I think the word you were looking for was the microbiome in your gut.
There you go. Yeah,
So
yeah.
that microbiome, as the ones that were processing the carbs and the sugar and the processed foods, as they get starved, they die off, and they die off, they release toxins, and that's part of what's making us sick. So yeah, I wholeheartedly 110% agree with your advice. Do it slow. I jumped in with both feet, and I paid the price. And it was a rough, probably 3 weeks when I first started,
Hmm.
the just feeling like I had the flu, nausea, diarrhea, just generally felt like absolute crap. But from my standpoint, I had been feeling worse than that for years. So to me, it wasn't a big thing. I didn't have any other choices. But when people do feel like they have other choices, this idea of transitioning slowly, I feel is absolute magic. I wish I would have done it that way. No. Before we let you go, what do you got going on? How can people find you, and maybe some stuff you got coming up in the near future?
Yeah, okay. So I do have a YouTube channel. I started it about 2 years ago. It's known as Wick Goes Carnivore, but the actual handle is at Wickivore, Wickivore. That was like my little play on of Wick and carnivore, so I did Wickivore. But anyway, so the channel name is known as Wick Goes Carnivore, so you can probably do a search like that and find me that way. Um, and basically, I talk some about my journey. I talk about different topics within carnivore, and often I'll do videos about, just getting started on carnivore, and, this is what I did, or this is what I would do now if I started, and that kind of stuff. What I've really been kind of into here lately is working out. And most of my time on carnivore, I didn't really work out over the first couple of years here. There was a little bit here and there. I'd work out for maybe a month or so, and that would be it. But most of what I've accomplished has been without working out. I started a 60-day workout transformation, as I like to call it, about a month ago. And basically every week I take you through the workouts that I've done, and where I'm at. I do different measurements across my body. I check on what my weight is, and just kind of give you an idea of where things are, take some pictures. And I just recently had my 30-day check-in, and you can definitely see the difference, in pictures, some muscle changes. The interesting thing is in 30 days, I've only lost 6/10 of a pound. So there really hasn't been weight loss, but there's been changes to my body. And this is why I like to do videos where I talk about not focusing just on weight loss, right? In my case, I had an inch and a half gone in my waist. So I was an inch and a half less. Can't think the right way I want to say that for some reason, but I was an inch and a half less after 30 days than I was at the start. And at my belly button, it was like, I think 2.5 inches or something like that. So, and also if I just look at my body, I can tell that some of the remaining body fat that I have in my belly, which is where most of my fat is at this point, it's in my belly. It's gone and it's going away. But yet I only lost 6/10 of a pound. And you might say to yourself, well, why is that? Well, I hadn't really worked out much, and I'm doing the carnivore diet, which, you eat a good amount of protein. It can really help with muscle building, and you start working out and you start to really gain muscle, and you have that transition period where you're gaining muscle, you're losing fat, and maybe you're not going to lose as much on the scale as you thought. And some people might get frustrated by that. I'm noting it, but I'm not getting frustrated because I know that there are changes happening in my body. That's why I'm doing the other measurements and so forth. And I know that over time, I'm going to start seeing some weight loss. And so far this week, I actually have started to see a little bit more weight loss. So we'll see as I get to my next check-in. But right now, it looks like I've lost a couple of pounds now. So it's like funny how 30 days, 6/10 of a pound, and all of a sudden in a week, 2 pounds, you know? So that's kind of something I'm working on right now that I've been doing a lot of the check-ins with that and talking about the workouts I'm doing and so forth. And I guess really quickly, the other way you can reach out to me would be through Facebook. I have just my name, Brian Nowicki, on Facebook. And I post a lot on Facebook about carnivore diet and promoting the diet and trying to help people be motivated and, you know, what they need to do to be accountable for themselves and everything. Because really, when it comes down to it, you can't expect other people to help you get to somewhere. You need to be able to do it yourself. You need to have that right mindset, the right motivation, and keep yourself accountable. So those are really the two best ways to find me.
Okay, yeah, we'll make sure that if you check down in the description, you'll find links to Brian's stuff. So I just want to thank Brian for coming in and chatting with us. It's a fantastic story, and just another example of the millions out there of people that are switching to this way of life and reaping the benefits, and knocking some pretty serious diseases on the head. For those who aren't aware, one of the autoimmune diseases I put in remission was myasthenia gravis, which is what was keeping me bedridden. And that's a huge one. So I'm in official 100% drug-free remission from all my autoimmune. And this is what's possible on the carnivore diet. I'm not saying it'll happen for everyone, and it's not a cure. I need people to get that out of their heads. This doesn't cure anything, but it can put stuff in remission, and it can heal stuff as long as you stay on the diet. That's important. So, any last words, Brian, before we end it?
Well, I'd like to thank you for having me on. I've been following your journey, and I got to say, your journey is incredible. You just touched a little bit about it, and it's inspiring to different people. And like you said, I think you said earlier that everybody that goes out there and talks about carnivores helping other people. Different people are going to be inspired by different things based on what they are feeling. And that's why it's important to have a lot of different people out there talking about the carnivore diet, because somebody has probably fixed something on carnivore for just about everybody out there that is suffering from something, and they can relate to that. And then it's really inspiring to them. So I want to thank you for everything you've done as well. It's just amazing, like you said, how people can fix so many different things. And that's a very good point that you brought up too about the you got to stick with the carnivore diet thing, So yeah, like so let me take AFib for a minute, right? Like if I said, you know what, I'm doing great with AFib, I'm going to stop doing the carnivore diet, and I went back to eating the way I was, why would I not expect that I'm going to get AFib again? Because I'm doing the same thing that I was before when I got it. So that's just like an analogy. Like you can't look at it as a diet anymore. It's a way of eating. It's Dr. Berry says the proper human diet, and it's the way you should be eating, and you can't go back to the way you were doing things before. Like that's insanity to go back to what you were doing before when it wasn't working and think that all of a sudden it's going to be different. So you have to keep sticking with it. You can't go back to eating that way. And, you need to understand that, like I said, it's really up to you to control your own health. Don't let the general public and the media and the pharmaceutical companies and the sugar industry out there dictate what you do for your health. You should take your own health into your own hands.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. All right, folks. So that's another wonderful carnivore story in the books. Appreciate you all being here. We'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.